All right, how's it going, y'all? So this is a very special product because this is the very first product I've ever received for review before it actually comes out. So you know it, SpaceX has finally made it in the big leagues. I'm there. Now this is the Synology RT6600ax, aka Wi-Fi 6. AX was supposed to be Wi-Fi 6, and then they just renamed it instead of having all these confusing letters afterwards. They just named it to much better like Wi-Fi 5, 6, 4, yada, yada, yada. So much better, but it is the 6600ax. And this is a Synology router for Wi-Fi 6. And I really think this thing might be able to beat out UniFi for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. So actually, before I went into my UniFi setup, I actually had the predecessor to this unit, which is the RT6600ax as my router. And I'll be honest with you, in a lot of ways, it was kind of better than UniFi for a lot of people, in my opinion. So I'm really hoping this thing can actually be a great option for people. From my experience with Synology routers, is they work very well for people who just need a single or maybe a second router in their entire house, and just something that's really easy to deploy. I mean, anybody who's seen this channel probably is familiar with Synology NAS, and they just make such good user interfaces for NASs and routers. And I've also found that the performance is really good as well for just a single, hey, I've got one router in the center of my house. I would definitely, and I did definitely recommend the 2600ax for a lot of clients who did not need to go through and have a bunch of access points all over their house. If you're not looking for that, Synology was the way to go, in my opinion, for what I had tested. But we're gonna go ahead and see about this thing. So just quick overview of the product. I don't actually have the full product list because it's not been released yet, so I don't have everything, but this is a Wi-Fi 6 router with 2.5 gigabit networking. And so we're gonna go through and see how much we can actually get out of Wi-Fi, as well as if we're directly plugged in. And so the other thing is, this is not gonna be a full-blown review. I'm not gonna have this thing running as my primary network for a few weeks before doing it like I'd want to if I was giving it a full review. Really, I'm gonna go through, test it out, go through and just see how the Wi-Fi speed drops off in different places. But it's not gonna be like a full review where I've really daily driven it, but I should get a pretty good understanding. And I did run its predecessor and I was very satisfied with that, so it's not like I don't know what I'm doing with these. So let's just go ahead and open her up. And we have, I believe, 6 antennas on this thing. Oh yeah. We have a bunch of antennas, and these are actually all used so that it can go through and do signal mapping. So whenever you're setting up a router like this, you want to make sure all of your antennas are facing directly upwards. Or if you were to mount it on a wall, you would want them all facing up like that. This way it can go through, and anytime you've actually got a signal coming in, if you think about the wave, it is going at the speed of light, but because of phase offset, you can still calculate it. Long story about how all that works. But if you think about a wave of light coming in, which is just a Wi-Fi signal, it's going to hit this antenna before it hits this one, before it hits this one. And so by doing that, you can get the direction that it's actually traveling. And if you're receiving it on all these antennas, you can do a really cool thing called beam steering, where you effectively just transmit power in one direction for the single client. And so this is a really, really powerful feature for that, and it can make for a very good Wi-Fi. These antennas are not just for show. These actually really do help a ton for actually going through and denoising signals, as well as transmitting energy very efficiently. So then on the back here, we've got a blue WAN in that's 2.5 gigabit, and then 4 LAN in, and one of them can actually be another redundant WAN in, which is pretty cool. And these appear to all be 2.5 gigabit. I'm gonna go through and test that out, but if so, that's awesome. All right, so quick cut in here because I just got the router up and running, and now I know about the actual 2.5 gigabit setup because I didn't have any manuals on this at all. And so currently, as far as I was able to tell, I'm quite confident in this answer, there's only one port that is 2.5 gigabit on the entire thing. And so that means that you have to, if you have a 2.5 gigabit internet connection, you have to plug it into port 1 and then just use that as your WAN, leaving you with 3 additional ports after that, as well as all the Wi-Fi. And I don't believe you can set the primary WAN as a Ethernet port as well. So you have to use port 1 for a 2.5 gigabit internet connection. Now it's going to mean that, as far as I can tell, if you want to get a single device, a 2.5 gigabit internet connection, as in it goes through the router directly to the device, that is not going to be possible with this router. I have not been able to find a way to do that because the one 2.5 gigabit port has to be used for internet in if you want to do that. But it really is up to you on whether or not that's important to you. I do like the flexibility with it because not a lot of people in this day and age do have above a 2 gig connection, because honestly, I've not been able to find a reason that I need anything more than 1 gigabit, and I'm a tech guy. But if you're looking for a router that's able to have 2.5 gigabit connections and you want to be able to have a single PC or something download Steam games at 2 gigabit, that's not going to be this router. I'm going to go through in a minute. I actually have some speed tests in this video, but back to the primary video after that clarification. The thing is, it's also got a USB port right here. And so these are awesome. You can go through and you can actually make this into a NAS, funny enough. Or you could also go through and hook it up to a printer and a bunch of things like that. So they've got a lot of options here. And then there's a physical power button, which is nice. So that way you don't have to just unplug it and plug it back in if you ever need to power cycle this thing. But the entire time I owned its predecessor, I never actually had to do that. So it's just a nice to have. Then in the box, they give you a Cat5e cable, which is good enough for 2.5 gigabit networking. And honestly, with how short it is, it would be good for 10 gig networking too, most likely. And yeah, that's all you need to go ahead and get started. I'm gonna go through and read this quick start guide really quick, just because, quite frankly, I have no idea what the specs of this thing is because it's not been released yet. So they go through, and much like everything Synology makes, setting it up is just incredibly easy. It is very, very, very simple to do. And so you've got two different options in here. You can either go through and it'll automatically create a Wi-Fi network by default. And so if you don't have any wired Ethernet cables, you can just use that. Or you can also go through and actually set up wired connection. So that just makes it really, really, really easy to go ahead and do. There's no messing about. It's just out of the box, super easy. All right, so now let's go ahead and plug her in. All right, so booting up, incredibly easy. It boots up very fast. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like instant, but it's fast enough considering how often you'll be doing it. And so then you've got two different options. I've gone through and directly hooked it up with a 2.5 gigabit connection directly into my laptop, or you can go through and you can see right here, well, not actually right there. You can see right here, if we drop down, we can see it creates a Synology network right here. And it's got the default password in the actual device. And so that way, if you don't have a wired connection, it's not a big deal. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and log into it. And it's automatically created the subnet 192.168, I believe. Yep. So we're just gonna go ahead and hit that. So it's 192.168.1.1, which is gonna be the default router. And we should get to go through and set up our network. I might go through and just really quickly go through and do a setup, but I'm just gonna go ahead and set this up. And honestly, setting this up is even easier than it used to be. Man, it just has taken you through every single thing you need to do. And I actually like this a lot. It's got, by default, external access turned off, which for a router is probably what you want to do unless you're a real tinkerer. And man, it just goes through and has set this up as pretty much as easy as possible. That is just, I mean, within a couple of minutes, you can have the thing running. And I mean, it's gonna go through and install everything, and it's apparently gonna take 3 minutes. But yeah, that was impressive how quick that was. So now I'm just gonna give it its time. And now it's done. We can easily, if you've got multiple access points, we can easily add those in there. The thing is, this is tri-band, which isn't really good for most consumer devices, but is awesome, awesome, awesome if you want to make a mesh network. That's where you don't actually have a wired connection. Technically, everything's a mesh network, but a mesh network is whenever you've got no wire in between multiple access points. And so instead, they can all just communicate over one of the bandwidths, leaving the other bandwidths just for communication. And so I wouldn't recommend that for a ton of deployments, but if you just have like a corner of your house that doesn't get great Wi-Fi, it's not a bad idea to just get a thing, and you don't have to go through and try to wire it, and you can get surprisingly good performance. So I'm just gonna go ahead and skip adding access points because they only sent me one, but it would probably be quite easy knowing Synology. And that's all there is to it. It's got the easy walkthrough, and it's got some great settings there. And we'll also say, no, I do not want to add that. And then you've got the option for automatic updates, all that good stuff. I do need to go through and sit down and actually do a review and setup guide on all this stuff because I really do like the Synology routers. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and check out what it has. All right, so now that I have this thing up and running, I now know, and you probably have already seen this part of the video, that there is just a single 2.5 gigabit connection on this device. And you can use it for one of two things. You can either use it for a local area network, or you can use it for your WAN. And so if you have a 2 gigabit internet, and I think AT&T has one, and I think Google Fiber has one, but as of right now, you're required to use Google Fiber's router, so you're not using this anyway. There's not a lot of companies right now in 2022 that have 2.5 gigabit internet. I have Google Fiber and I have the option to upgrade to 2 gigabit, but I'm not going to because I literally do not know what I would use the extra bandwidth for. Though if I was a large family and I actually had a bunch of kids who were all doing stuff together, maybe the only time I would ever see it is going through and downloading large files and things like that. Because if you're talking like streaming, you can easily stream probably 15 4K videos off of a 1 gigabit connection and not even really saturate your network. I mean, I think YouTube and Netflix are like 20 megabit for a 4K video, so you don't have to worry about doing that. So really, whatever else there is, I have no idea, and that's why I don't pay for the 2 gig connection. But if that's a limit to you, that's not what this router is going to be able to do. I do like the flexibility if you are just going to have one port to make it WAN or LAN, because if you had a Synology or something or a NAS, Synology won't put a 2.5 gigabit connection on their NAS apparently. It's kind of nice to be able to have multiple 1 gig connections to that, and so you're not really throughput limited. And so if you have two different wired gigabit connections to it, they'll both be able to get saturated with the lanes, but unfortunately you're not going to be able to have one device directly hooked up to that, which does suck. I am now going to go through, and what we've been all waiting for is checking the iPerf speed test. So right now I've configured port 1 directly into my 2.5 gigabit switch that is hooked up to the rest of my network, and that's acting as the internet. And that's about the fastest internet you can ask for because it's very, very low latency, and it's over 2.5 gig connection. And so on there, I've got my TrueNAS server and Wi-Fi is off, so I'm just directly hooked up to the router right here over a 1 gig connection, and we're going to do a quick iPerf 3 test. All right, and so just from a quick test, it did seem the first little bit did kind of take a minute to get up and running. Let's see if that happens again here. Yeah, so it apparently just, I think maybe it was going to a sleep mode or something, and the first initial I wasn't doing anything with it, so it took a little while. But we were getting a almost perfectly consistent 940 megabit connection, which is about as good as you can ask for. Now this is not an IMX test, so it's not perfect, it's not showing like a huge strange load on the thing, but it is able to route via iPerf 3 at essentially the full gigabit connection, which is exactly what you want to see. But now I'm going to do something really quick, and I want to test the Wi-Fi out. All right, so this is a fast forward to an hour later probably, and I did actually some pretty considerable testing because I was getting some weird results. So I was able to fully route when I was wired with this thing. I was able to easily get 1 gigabit connection for iPerf 3 when I was hooked up to it. So it's easily able to route at 1 gigabit. I was unable to test if it's able to actually route at 2 gigabit, just because I don't have enough devices on hand and I don't have enough things I could do consistently there. So I was not able to test that, but it didn't have any problem with 1 gigabit, so I would not be too worried about it. Then I was testing the Wi-Fi, and that is why this took a lot longer than I thought it would, and why there's now kind of a hard cut there than a nice pretty video. And that's because I got some really weird results that I was not expecting out of this thing. So I was unable to get more than about 400 megabit out of this thing over Wi-Fi. Now, that being said, that's a pretty good number, but I was expecting it to at least get up to maybe 700 like I've been able to get with my UniFi. And so I was pretty disappointed by that, and I was trying some things out, and yeah, I just could not get over 400 megabit, even when I was in the same area. I then went through, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's unfortunate. I then went through and actually went and saw the range of it, and the range entirely made up for it. I was able to, in my bedroom closet, which is I can't even get my current UniFi Wi-Fi to get in there, and it's about twice as close. I was getting 100 megabit connection across there, and that is across 1 wall, 2 wall, 3 wall, 4 walls over Wi-Fi 6. And I was able to get a pretty clean, I think the ping on it was 3 milliseconds, all the way back there. And that is the reason you buy this router. The reason you buy this router is because it's not going to throw up insane numbers. Maybe they can fix that with an update, but it's just not looks like it's tuned to throw up big single client numbers. Instead, it is tuned to have really good long performance. I would say that this is probably the best long performance I've seen out of any Wi-Fi 6 device. I have not tested the UniFi Wi-Fi 6 long range, so I'm unable to compare it against that. I have heard it does have considerable range. But for somebody who just wants a Wi-Fi router that's going to work very easily and throw it in the middle of their house, I think this is a very good option. The 2.5 gigabit connections are somewhat disappointing because there's only the single one, and so you can't actually route at 2.5 gigabit for a single client. That would be, I think, the biggest limitation is that, or if somebody wants to have a ton of these. If you want to have a bunch of Wi-Fi access points all over your house, I would probably recommend the UniFi system. But if you just want something like this that just works, so we're reasonably going to be comparing this to the UniFi Dream Machine, I think that this is a great offering, unless you want some of the specific UniFi features. This has a much easier user interface to work with. The long-range Wi-Fi performance of this thing is unbelievable. Like, it absolutely outclassed anything I was expecting it to, and I actually had to redo the tests a few times because I did not believe it, because this is a real world environment. I did turn the signal up to high because I'm setting this up in my head as somebody who has this and this is their only Wi-Fi access point. So setting it up to high makes sense, but I was able to get 120 upload and then about 80 download. Sorry, flip those. I was able to get 120 download and about 80 upload from my back bedroom closet, which is way back in the other opposite corner of the house, as far away as possible, and through a ton of walls. So it absolutely is a tank for long range performance. I really love the SRM interface that these things have. I think it makes it incredibly easy to set up. And back when I had one of these, it was so reliable. The thing you buy a Synology for is, I mean, none of them are that fast for the money, but all of them tend to be just very feature rich tanks. You've got VLAN support on this thing now, which is awesome. And you've also got default networking for GuestNet. You've got multi-WAN options. You've got a lot of really great things here that I think come in a very good package. Now, unfortunately, at the time of me writing this video, it's not out yet, so I have no idea how much it's actually going to cost. But I do think if you buy this and it's going to be your single Wi-Fi access point for the entire house, and you do not have a 2.5 gigabit internet connection that you want to make sure you can get a single device 2.5 gigabit, I think this is a great router. I think you will buy it, and I do not think you will be disappointed at all by it, just because it comes in such a nice clean package. It makes it very easy to go throw a hard drive in here, and now boom, you've got a pretty decent NAS. I mean, Synology make incredible NASs, but if you just need something simple, you've got that here. They've got all the great features, and it can go through and integrate into whatever you want. The VPN connections on these things are so much easier and more feature rich than setting it up on a UniFi. And I think this is a really great competitor. It's not going to give you insane numbers when you're right next to it, but if you just want a very good Wi-Fi experience, and trust me, 400 megabit in the same room is about as good of a Wi-Fi experience as you can get unless you're downloading massive files or something like that. But if you just want a really solid performance for your phone, I think this thing's awesome. Now, who knows? This is not even out yet, so there might even be an update that fixes that. But it does very much feel like that Synology has tuned this thing, not to give big numbers, but to give very consistent long-range results, which, I'll be honest with you, for 99% of users, I think that's exactly what you want. UniFi lets you do way more. You can have an access point in pretty much every single room and just have huge numbers wherever you are. But that's a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of configuration. If you just want something that works, I would highly recommend this unit. All right, well, that's going to be it for this review. I will be going through, and before I send this back to Synology, I'll want to definitely make some videos, tutorials on how to set up SRM, because I loved SRM back when I was running it, and it's actually still the Wi-Fi my old roommates are using. But this thing, I think is going to be a performance tank for long range Wi-Fi. I think it's pretty much got whole home Wi-Fi, and because of the multi-band connections, if you do want to have like a single extender for a corner of your house that doesn't get great Wi-Fi, that makes it incredibly easy, and it's going to be on a different frequency, and so it's not going to be interfering with the primary network. All right, go ahead and leave any other things you'd like me to check out in SRM, and hopefully sooner rather than later so I can take care of them before they get sent back, and have a good one. Bye.